Hi, it's me, your personal Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And today, what I'm going to be doing is reading for you Conquer the World, the International Proletariat Must and Will by Avakian, Chairman of the Central Committee of the Revolutionary Communist Party. Now this is from Revolution Special Issue number 50 from December 1981. This is volume 6, number 2. Okay. We're going to be starting with page 1, Further Historical Perspectives on the First Advances in Seizing and Exercising Power, Proletarian Dictatorship, and Embarking on the Socialist Road. Avakian, who was in France seeking political refugee status, gave an informal talk in the early fall of 1981, ranging widely over a number of historical and present questions of the world proletarian revolution. 3 short excerpts were originally published in the Revolutionary Worker newspaper, numbers 125 through 127. The author made certain changes in the text, going over it for publication in Revolution. Conquer the World, the International Proletariat Must and Will, by Avakian, Chairman of the Central Committee, Revolutionary Communist Party, USA. In this talk, I will address a number of general themes, and then some attempts will be made to develop particular points within those general themes. Now, this is likely to be, in fact, you can almost guarantee that this is going to be somewhat scattered and hopefully, in a way, a little trippy. But we'll see what happens. The basic purpose and nature of this is to lay out some ideas and some points that have been spoken to in the literature, in the reports from the Central Committee that people have seen and been studying over the past 2 years or so. And it's in that character of, and has the purpose of, an informal talk to try to develop some of these ideas and to try to give some play to some thinking on these ideas, many of which were explicitly only tentative thesis. The attempt is not being made to present worked out ideas, and that's going to be truly generally of the whole talk and will also be particularly obvious in relation to certain specific points. So it shouldn't be seen as an overall worked out personal opinion, let alone any kind of systematic presentation of the line and views of the organization overall on these questions, but should be taken more as something informal that stimulates some thinking, study, and discussion, and hopefully some further development on a number of these points. So, with that introduction, there are basically going to be 5 main points. The first is further historical perspectives on the first advances in seizing and exercising power, proletarian dictatorship, and embarking on the socialist road. Number 2 is more on the proletarian revolution as a world process. Number 3 is on the subject I call Leninism as the bridge, which will be clear when we get to its context. Number 4 is some summation of the Marxist-Leninist movement arising in the 1960s and the subjective factor in light of the present and developing situation and the conjuncture shaping it. Number 5 is some questions related to the line and work of our party and the special internationalist responsibilities. These are the 5 main points, and there will be a conclusion attempting to tie together some of the main themes of these different points. So to begin. 1. Further historical perspectives on the first advances in seizing and exercising power, proletarian dictatorship, and embarking on the socialist road. First, some thoughts about the Paris Commune. In reading over Marx's most systematic summation of the Paris Commune, the Civil War in France, which has an introduction by Engels, it's striking in light of all the experience and development not only in the practical struggle but in the theoretical realm, then that Marx's summation is at one and the same time an extremely far-sighted and rather primitive, and this goes also in general for Engels' introduction highlighting Marx's summation. This is not too surprising, given that the Paris Commune was the first actual successful seizure of power and lasted approximately 2 months before it was drowned in blood. It's also not surprising that in the First International, of which Marx was, at least in an ideological sense and a general theoretical sense, the leader and in which he was a very active in practical way, was itself a melange of a number of different tendencies. Scientific socialism hadn't been thoroughly differentiated and distinguished itself from a number of utopian and other forms of unscientific socialism, even within the First International itself, which is a point to the ramifications and implications of which will be touched on in a little bit later. In terms of being farsighted, if you read what Marx has to say, it's very clear that he was able to draw out and concentrate a lot of key lessons from very brief and primitive experience of just 2 months of power in Paris. I mean, it's a significant city, but still just one part, even if it's a very significant part of France. And the decisive lesson that was both drawn out and driven home much more sharply by Marx at the time, that the proletariat cannot lay hold of the ready-made state machinery, but has to smash and dismantle it and create its own machinery, its own revolutionary dictatorship. This was obviously an example of Marx's scientific method. And based on the farsightedness, Marx was able to draw out that lesson and illustrate it with a number of particulars from the brief and somewhat diffuse experience of the Paris Commune. But at the same time, while the summation that Marx made in terms of what it contributed to the long-term struggle and the overall goal of the international proletariat was, like the Commune itself, immortal. Looking at it in terms of the experience since then and what's been summed up out of the experience, you can see some of its limitations. For example, this comes through a number of the comments that Marx makes about the bureaucracy, the standing army, the question of universal suffrage, and the recall of officials, the questions of no officials being paid higher wages than those of a working person, the way in which education and religion and culture in general are dealt with. For instance, he says at one point that the priests, he says it more poetically than this, but basically the point is that the priests will be left to stand or fall, that is, they will be able to eat or not eat on the basis of whether or not they can actually win support from their parishioners, and they will not receive state subsidies. This was one of the experiences of the Commune. Well, obviously, historical experience has shown that's far from enough of a radical rupture to deal with that problem, and that's just one small example. It's not that Marx said exactly that it was, but the summation did not go farther than that. The same thing is true when he says that one of the great things about the Commune had to offer, its real strong selling point, to put it crudely, to the peasantry was that it would be able to reduce significantly the bureaucratic encumbrance and parasitic body of society as a whole, represented by the bureaucracy, and thereby would be able to essentially cheapen the cost to the peasantry of the state apparatus. This is linked closely with the question of whether or not a standing army is necessary, whether or not you can trim down full-time officials in the bureaucracy so simply, as Marx seemed to feel and seemed to conclude from the experience of the Commune, and whether it would be possible to pay government officials wages no higher than those of the working man, as was done by decree in the Commune. All of these things, by historical experience, and particularly in that experience where the proletarian dictatorship was consolidated and existed over a period of time where the socialist road was embarked on, have not been possible so far. Even where a correct line has been carried out, even where the policy can't be attributed to errors or to right deviations, it has not been possible to do all these things in the way that Marx, drawing on the experience of the Commune, thought not only possible but necessary key weapons in ruling and transforming society. Life has proved not to be so simple as that, and in fact the possibilities for the proletariat in Paris to win over the peasantry, not just in the short run, but to win over and maintain their support through all of the twists and turns of the struggle, were not nearly so great, nor was the question nearly so simple as Marx seems to treat it in the Civil War in France, the concentrated summation of the Commune. And similarly, the question of the nation and the relationship of the struggle in that particular country to the international struggle was not clearly handled, not only in the Commune itself, in the outlook and policies of the people who were leading the Commune at the time, for example, in their appeals to the soldiers of the reactionary army on a patriotic basis, but even to a certain degree in the writings of Marx and comments of Engels in summing up the Commune. The distinction between the nation and internationalism was not as clearly drawn as had been learned that it must be drawn. Of course, on the one hand, this was in the area before imperialism, but on the other hand, France was an advanced capitalist country on the threshold of advancing to the imperialist stage, and it should be said in passing here that Marx's references to imperialism in the Civil War in France do not represent the same analysis of a new and special, in fact the highest and final stage of capitalism as done later by Lenin. Here I'll just interject a comment which will probably get me in trouble with somebody somewhere, But one of the things that is rather clear to me in reading over Lenin's polemics on the question of defense of the fatherland during World War I is that he has to do a great deal of work against Kautsky and others who were the accepted authorities on Marxism, much more so than Lenin, who had all the quotes in stocks to pull out of the cupboard to justify their opportunist lines, whether it was a social democracy or social chauvinism. In reading this over, it's clear that, on the one hand, Lenin correctly made the terrain of the argument that people were misrepresenting and misusing quotes from Marx and Engels because they were dealing with statements by Marx and Engels before the era of imperialism, when the only question, and as Lenin says, is the victory of which bourgeoisie would be more favorable to the proletariat as a whole internationally. But it's also clear, or at least in my opinion it's clear, especially if you deal with Engels, who lived more than a decade longer than Marx, that not only was it a question of being quoted out of context, out of condition, time, and place, but also this approach of determining which bourgeoisie's victory or defeat would be more favorable was still being applied when it was becoming no longer applicable. As late as 1891, for example, Engels was still talking about defending the fatherland of Germany in a war against the Tsar. That was beginning of page 3, and we'll continue this later. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Jesus Christ. Have a nice day.